is what you get out of this video. First of all, this camera, and this lens, and this adapter, and this adapter. And basically my thoughts about them, my thoughts are a bit valuable, but the thing is, I have a system behind buying this camera, and this is basically a cinema kit. This is also your travel photography kit. This is also the best YouTube kit you can get. This is also perfect for shooting portraits, and this is also perfect for shooting everything when it comes to video, when it comes to photo. These lenses are completely silent. These adapters allow you to switch between full frame look and normal look. This camera is actually quite small, and it's actually all in everything is completely cheap. And another system is the fact that it's not really a system, but another fact is the fact that you can get all of this for 700 euros or for 700 bucks if you buy it refurbished. So what we will do right now is we take a look at this set, and I will explain to you in detail why it makes sense to buy exactly this system. Okay, so let's start. I have to back up a little bit because my journey with photography started when I was, of course this sounds like, okay, this is the set and now he's telling you about his journey in photography. But let me explain. There is a bigger connection behind all of this, and you need to understand the bigger connection in order to understand the importance of this kit. So first of all, I started with photography when I was about 10. I first got my first digital camera, and when first digital cameras came out. I then, after a while, so I started to take a few pictures, I upgraded again to a Nikon, I upgraded again to a Canon. This was the first time I was able to shoot full HD. So, then the next step was to go pro. And going pro at this time meant going with a Canon 60D, a DSLR, and basically for the first time having lenses on a camera. For all those of you who don't really understand what a lens is able to do, it's this. When you have a smartphone camera, you have a fixed zoom basically. And what a lens allows you to do is to switch this zoom. So if you have a zoom lens, it's basically the same as zooming with a smartphone. Nowadays smartphones have different kind of lenses on them. So basically they have different cameras, and the smartphones nowadays switch in between those. This means you can actually have a telephoto lens and another lens. But what a zoom lens allows you to do is by varying the glasses in between, so the distances between the glasses. What this allows you to do is to zoom. I mean, of course this is obvious, but smartphones for the most time, like in the last 10 years, have done it almost always digitally. So much about lenses. So what we need to understand about lenses is that there are ones with fixed zoom. So this is, for example, 50mm. 50mm is a slight zoom, you could say. So what the eye has is about 28mm, so 50mm is about 2 times what you see within the normal range of your eye. So then I got my first camera, which was a 60D. Not really, because it was the one a family member of mine had. And I was able to use lenses for the first time. What this allowed me to do is to shoot these typical images for the first time you see when you think of a professional picture. So for example, let's take a look at the screen right here, and we already see that there's a background and a foreground, and the background is blurred and the foreground isn't. So this typical lens look, not lens look, but pro camera look you have also with smartphones these days. So for example, if you look now at my face, it's sharp and the background is blurred. So this typical pro camera look is what smartphones these days try to imitate with the portrait mode. So the next thing is, or the next thing when it came to my journey, was I used this camera. And I used the 60D, and then I got, finally, for my 18th birthday, I got my first 70D, which was the first semi-pro camera I had. And now I began to take pictures. The thing was, a DSLR is basically a camera that has a mirror built in. This means that there is, so for example, not for example, but if you take a look inside a camera, a fully digital camera, then what you have is essentially the sensor. And because it's a pro camera, this means the sensor is very big. So if we press this button, this is the sensor. This is an APS-C sensor. This means it's a little bit smaller than the standard pro camera sensor. So the next thing we need to understand, or I kind of lost my train of thought. Is it the train of thought? I am not quite sure. But the next thing we need to understand is that up until the point of mirrorless cameras, there was a mirror in pro cameras. So basically the light comes in this direction, so the lens captures the light you exactly like your eye does, and then it concentrates the light onto the sensor. And basically what cameras with mirrors built in had was the fact that they switched. So they took the light and then they took the light and mirrored it into here. And so what you have with these cameras nowadays is it's digital. So this means that if you look inside here, of course you cannot really, then the image you see is not actually I would pause. And I'm back again, so there was somebody and I didn't want to be weird and talk into my phone. Back to the cameras. So nowadays, the image you see up here, so the basic thing you think of if you think of a photographer is him looking through the lens like this. And this actually is a thing that is only possible due to the mirror. And nowadays it is possible due to screens being as good as being able to replace this mirror function. So basically, with the old DSLR style cameras, what this mirror allows you to do is, if you look in here, you see the image almost exactly as it hits the sensor later on. With today's cameras, with the mirrorless cameras, you don't have this option anymore, but you see the image on a screen. And what this makes possible is for cameras to be actually as thick as this and not as this. So the next thing we need to understand, or you need to understand when it comes to my journey with cameras, is the fact that this camera was very bulky. Also, zoom lenses in general are very bulky because they have a lot of glass in them. This means that this lot of glass is of course a lot of weight. So I took this camera basically everywhere. For the next few years I switched location, and actually we will go onto a small, I don't know what it is called, but it's essentially a small house. And yeah, so now let's go in there. And the reason I switched is because there was a truck, not a truck, but yeah. Okay, so now we are ready to fully understand the Canon 80D. Okay, We already covered the mirror and mirrorless thing. So nowadays these cameras don't have mirrors anymore, and this actually allows them to be much smaller in size. For me, this meant that I essentially wanted to switch to a mirrorless camera. So I had the Canon 70D before, and I used it with a zoom lens. And a zoom lens is essentially pretty big. So if we take a look at the camera right now, it is much smaller in footprint, and this is a huge advantage. For me, for the next years, this meant I had to carry a bigger camera like this. So this is essentially a very small package if you think about it. The zoom lens I had previously was a 18 to 200 millimeter, so a pretty decent zoom. And the thing is, my camera body was a little bit thicker. Therefore, almost all the time, you need a camera bag that looks like this and is essentially a different camera bag. So it's not something you just throw in your backpack, but it is something you just have to think about, and you have to carry with you all the time. And whenever I got to a city, so whenever I traveled, I had to carry this huge camera bag. And it's not only this huge camera bag you carry, so not only the physical thing, but also the mental aspect of it. So for example, if you leave this camera bag somewhere, it's even more than $1,000 worth of equipment. So the 70D was around 900 when I bought it, and it's already was pretty cheap. So it usually was even more expensive than that, than the zoom lens, which was like 300 or 400 euros. And then I had a portrait lens, a 50 millimeter, which was also around 100. So then you have the camera bag, then you have all of your SD cards, and this essentially is a pricey package, and you don't want to lose it. You have the risk of it getting stolen all the time. Of course, these factors still are the same when it comes to a pro camera, but the thing you need to understand is this. I essentially was done with shooting photos after a few years. I just didn't feel like taking pictures anymore, because it was just this organizing things all the time. So having this camera bag in front of you, and you need to charge your batteries all the time, and you need to charge, and you need to have the batteries charged. And if you are, so for example, I made 2 or 3 Euro trips, so basically traveling around Europe, and I took my pro camera with me, the Canon 70D, because I took pictures basically all the time. And what you need to think about is, you do not only have to charge your phone, but you also have to charge your camera, and you also have to charge 2 camera batteries. So if you are at a hostel, for example, the big problem you have is that you only have 1 socket, maybe, and you need to charge all of these devices. And this means you essentially have to figure it out somehow. And it's just all these little parts connected. But let's get back to this 50, the Canon Eos M50. So I wanted to switch. I wanted something smaller, but I also wanted to go more pro, because let's face it, the Canon 70D, so this is for example the camera, if you know Casey Neistat, he used it for almost most of his vlogs. So this is a pretty standard camera. The main thing about the 70D, the 60D and the 80D also, and also these days the 90D, I think the light here is not optimal, and it's switching all the time, which is something that's not optimal, but I don't think I have a solution. I have a headlight usually in my camera, in my bag, not in my camera bag, but I think I don't have it right now. So, yeah, maybe if I move a little bit here, it's better, maybe not. Back to Casey Neistat. He was the one who basically invented kind of the modern style of vlogging, but that's an entirely different story. I just mentioned him as an example for the basic function the 70D had, many other cameras don't have. And I already told you, it's a screen that flips out, but not only flips out, but you also can turn. So, for example, if I switch on this camera right now, I can film the phone. So this means that if I zoom in, you can see yourself. I also can see myself now because I'm recording on my phone and using the front screen. And this is huge, because if you ever filmed yourself, the basic problem is that you don't see yourself. And this means that you essentially have to figure out some way to actually frame yourself and to actually expose yourself. I mean, nowadays it's easy because phones are really good these days. And for example, I just use my S10 and record with the front camera. And this is a thing that hasn't been possible like in the last 10 years. And also the mic these days is just... The microphone in the Galaxy S10 is even better than in a pro camera like the Canon M50. It's better. And it just makes more sense to use a phone, therefore. And this is just kind of nice, because then you don't have to use a pro camera all the time. And you just can use a phone like this. So I just switched on the setup a little bit because I needed to charge my phone. Back to 70D, back to camera, and back to kind of my story with the camera. Okay, by the way, this will turn kind of into a podcast episode that also has video, so it's much more me talking about camera and stuff, or my camera and stuff, the Canon M50 and stuff, than a short quick video guide tutorial kind of video, because the thing is, you find these already. And what I also think is that there are two tendencies. This is just something else, by the way. This is basically me with a cup of tea telling you about things in general, but I don't have the cup of tea. So there are these two tendencies. The one is everything goes into short form content like TikTok, where videos are only 15 seconds. And the second one is that people aren't as dumb as everybody thought they were. So, for example, if you take a look at TV shows for the last 70 years, most of them are pretty much made for someone who has, I don't know, who just doesn't have any hobbies, any interests at all. And just this general thing, this general talk about random things that nobody is interested in. I mean, just the pure fact that we have celebrities on there that just tell us about, I don't know, just things that aren't interesting to anyone, really. And yeah, so the thing is, people are really intelligent. People are really willing to listen to those conversations, and if you are watching, you probably are also willing to listen to something like this. So this is just about the format of this video. Back to the Canon M50 and back to the flip out screen and why this is and was so huge. The light is kind of essentially going out, and this is of course not really good, but I just don't have a light with me, and so I would have my Galaxy smartwatch, which would be a little bit of a light, but essentially, yeah, this is the situation, and my face will probably be darker and darker. So, why is the flip out screen so huge? Because you can actually film yourself. Because, as we already saw outside, you can just put the camera down and just randomly position it somewhere. You can just use the camera and film with, for example, I mean, it just looks insane right now because it's outside. Of course, you are not seeing it in the right way right now, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so you can move around. Basically, oh, I just see that, and there is the light of the screen actually lightening my face. Okay, back to the camera. Why does a flip out screen make sense? Because it's just the most practical thing, and if you don't have it, you have to find a way to go around this and to basically find another way around this. The Sony cameras, they also have flip out screens, but the fact of the matter is that they only flip out into this direction. So this means you only have the functionality of, okay, you can put it down, but you don't have the functionality of actually being able to film yourself. And this is huge. So there only have been a few cameras on the market that had such a flip out screen like this camera. And now, this is kind of a standalone thing these Canon cameras had, and not even the pro Canon cameras, but just the Canon cameras that were the semi-pro line. So basically, when it comes to Canon, there is the pro line. So these are called, basically they have single digits like the 5D, like the 6D, the 7D. Then there is the semi-pro range, kind of in the middle between amateur and also pro. And then there is the 3-digit line, so the 600D, 700D, 800D, 900D. And the Canon M50 is kind of something else, because these were the first mirrorless cameras Canon had. So I'm just looking at my watch right now, and maybe I can switch on the light at the watch and use it to light my face. It doesn't work as well as I thought. So, okay, it just doesn't work. Alright, back to cameras. So, for years I thought Sony cameras were the way to go because I wanted to get more professional. I had the 70D, but the 70D just wasn't really good. It's not that the camera itself wasn't really good, but the possibilities of filming yourself just were, of course I just could have used it, but the problem was it was just this bulky and it was just not, I took it to all these locations and in the end it just was a frustrating experience for me. And also the fact that you had to handle these RAW files, and I had to handle these RAW files, and they were just, it was not only a mental burden, but it took hours and hours and hours to actually get something out of this camera. And so therefore, I thought, what if I switched to something more professional? I wanted to get more into filming, and I also wanted to get more professional with shooting photographs. And so I thought, why not get into the Sony camp? This was the plan for years. But the thing is, if you get into the Sony camp, it's like you have to pay at least 2,000, 3,000 or 4,000 euros or bucks or dollars. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, the camera body itself is already up into the thousands. And so this was the plan originally, but I never actually bought a Sony camera because of the flip out screen. Of course, there are also these things about the color science, and oh man, my face is getting really dark right now. Maybe if I move down here it gets a little bit better. So it would have been such a huge investment, and it's not only the camera body itself. You have to buy the camera body, which is already 2,000 or 3,000 euros. The next thing you have to buy is the lenses. And the lenses, if you switch to professional, are just much more expensive. So for example, if you take the Canon Ef lenses, they are kind of the mid-range or the entry-level lenses Canon offers. Then there are usually, the price is usually about 300, 400, 500. That's the Canon Ef line or the Canon EF line. The EF line is only for APS-C, and the Canon Ef line is also for basically the full frame sensor. So if you're thinking of a sensor, like I showed you the size of the sensor of the Canon M50, and then there is the full frame. So basically full frame is, kind of the full frame. In German it's called Kleinbild. And so this was used for basically shooting video up until a certain point. And so this was the standard, and then everything went digital, and they just took the same sensor size and basically used it. So And there is, of course, a difference, because the bigger the sensor, the better the quality of the image, because you basically can capture more light. This is the basic difference. So therefore, pro cameras tend to have bigger sensors. So now, also, I wanted to switch to full frame for years, because full frame is basically just getting more professional. And so I thought about it for years, because I wanted to replace my 70D. It just didn't record any slow-mo at all. It just recorded 1080p. I mean, still pretty good, but I wanted maybe to upgrade to 4K. Maybe also wanted to shoot stock footage, in the past at least. Stock footage is basically recording footage and then selling it online for everyone who uses it. You nowadays see it in YouTube videos. If you just see some random person with, for example, finances, or I don't know, if you see these videos that are of a general topic and then there is just a random person that appears, most of these videos are stock footage. So, okay, back to the M50. I thought Sony was the way to go. But the thing is, it was just expensive. I would have to buy the pro camera lenses Sony offers, because of course you can also adapt Canon lenses or lenses of other manufacturers. Oh no, it's getting really dark. The lenses of other manufacturers, and then, for example, using Canon lenses on Sony cameras, which is a thing you can do, but a thing you only do if you also want to invest in an adapter. And then there is this thing about the adapter, because the adapter adapts the functionality of the lens onto the camera body, and if the manufacturer of the lens and the camera body differs, then you have this problem that maybe not all the functions of the Canon lens, for example, are supported on the Sony camera, which then creates kind of this problem, because you would have to buy the Sony lenses, of course. So then I would have to buy a Sony lens, and it would have been like 600, 800 euros for one single lens. And then, of course, there's the problem which lens to get. Okay, so I had the Canon 70D, I had the 50mm, and I had the 18-200. I used the 18-200 zoom lens for basically shooting everything, but there was also this other problem I had. The problem was that both of these lenses, my German accent is getting a little bit through, both of these lenses didn't shoot silently. So whenever you focused, you had a problem that if you were shooting video, then yeah, there were just these focusing noises and it wasn't silent. Therefore, you couldn't use the audio, and whenever you wanted to shoot video, you would have to use an external audio device, such as a microphone. And this created the problem that you also would have to get a microphone. So you would have to get the camera body, you would have to get the microphone, you would have to get a lens, you would have to get an adapter, you would have to get a second camera lens, and this would just create this huge financial problem also. And not only is it, of course, it's not only about having the money, but also in just investing the money and just thinking about all of this, because you don't want to invest 4,000, 5,000 euros or dollars and then at a certain point just realize that another option would have been better, and therefore you have to sell everything, or you switch to Canon again and then you just sell everything, but you just don't get the original price. And I am switching location again because it gets really dark and I don't want the video to be this crappy, because it's essentially just me in the dark talking right now. So I switch location and then I will be back like the Terminator. We are back into the studio, in the studio, and we still will talk about the camera, mainly the Canon 70D. And so I still have the camera with me, and I actually can show you a few things right now. So The main thing that happened with me and my love for photography and cameras was the fact that it just got it just got pre- it just got prevented from existing anymore. So for the last years, I took so many pictures, and I took this camera bag to just so many places that I eventually just got rid of the camera bag altogether, and just took the camera and placed it in my backpack, which isn't the best idea ever because lenses, let's face it, aren't quite stable and they are quite fragile indeed. And this means that whenever you hit a zoom lens, for example, if you have it like this and you hit it in the front, then actually things happen that can break the lens. So there were like 2 or 3 years where I basically used my camera. So I had my camera on with me on a Interrail trip, which is a trip throughout Europe, and I used it. And the thing that happened was that I also used a skateboard. And so I had the skateboard on my backpack and I had this camera all the time on the front. Because let's face it, if you want to take a shot, if you want to have the shot, if you want to be able to take the shot, I mean, sometimes it's only seconds, and with a camera, this is another big advantage of a pro camera, whereas in the past you had to, for example, if you have a pocket camera, then the zoom usually takes like, but with a pro camera, it's basically like hitting it on and then just pressing, and then you are there. So it's much quicker. So I had it in the front of me all the time, and what happened is that it just hit my skateboard all the time. And so the lens basically broke. So this meant that I had to replace it. And I replaced it with a lens I didn't really buy, but I just lended. And it just happened, and I threw my camera to the ground. And yeah, the lens was broken again. So I had broken 2 lenses within like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, or maybe it was half a year. But the thing is that it just, I mean, just the sheer fact I had the camera in my backpack and it just, so I was in the mountains, I was hiking, and it just fell out of my backpack because yeah, it just fell out, and because I hadn't closed it properly. And so there was these many things that just led to me not wanting to shoot with a pro camera anymore. And then at the same time, I wanted to upgrade all the time to a mirrorless camera or to another pro camera, which also would be able. So I wanted to shoot for YouTube for years at this point in time. And I had seen all these great channels on YouTube. And as a matter of fact, I wanted to do something like this. And so they had all these slow-mo shots where they were basically showing off random things in slow-mo. But the thing with the Canon 70D is it just shot 1080p, so full HD, but without slow-mo. So the only slow-mo rate you could get was 50 frames per second. So this is basically 24 frames per second is the usual thing. And so this is the standard for movies and TV almost everywhere around the world, sometimes 25, sometimes 30 frames per second. But if you double it, then you essentially have 2 times the speed. Not the speed, but half the speed. So this means you have a 2 times slow-mo, you could say. So the thing is, I wanted a pro camera that also could shoot slow motion, and that just was able to do more things like this, and that just looked also cool, and not like the 70D, which just looked bulky at this point in time. Of course, there is also an argument to be made about small cameras not having a good grip, but this is an entirely different story. So I thought I wanted to buy the Sony A7S II for this was my plan for years. But the thing is, I just never made it a reality. And then I finally threw down my camera, and so it also fell to the ground, and I did it again. And then apparently, because of these two accidents, a few months after this, my Canon 70D randomly just started to produce images that just were complete crap. So basically, it was just noise. And so I thought about repairing it. I sent it in, and as a matter of fact, the repair for the Canon 70D would have been pricier than getting a Canon M50. So I thought a lot of getting into YouTube or shooting for YouTube, not necessarily as a job, but much more as a hobby, because I had admired these photographers also, who had shot for YouTube, who had made YouTube videos for years at this point, and I just wanted to do something similar, because I had been shooting for, I don't say I was a photographer, but I had been shooting photos since 2013, and whenever I had the chance to, and so this was like one of my biggest hobbies, and therefore I just wanted to do something with it. And so as I started to look for cheaper cameras again, or just for alternatives to my 70D, because the repair just was too expensive. I could have gotten the 70D again. As a matter of fact, I ordered already the 80D, but it would have been exactly the same, just with a few minor things dissolved. But essentially, the Canon 80D wasn't a upgrade at all. It just was exactly the same thing, just with the problem at this point in time was cell phones just got really good. So this was 2 or 3 years ago, 2018, I think. So cell phones already had these, they already could record 8K, not really 8K. So nowadays they can record 8K, but they could already record 4K. And the Canon 80D just couldn't. I mean, that's just, the 90D finally came out like 1 year ago in 2020, and it finally could shoot 4K. A pro camera, Canon. I mean, and they couldn't even shoot 4K. I mean, that's just a little bit disappointing at this point in time, or was disappointing at that point in time. So this was also one of the main reasons I wanted to switch to Sony. But apparently, so my big plan of switching to Sony would have cost me 2,000, 3,000, probably, in a practical sense, it would have been like 4,000 euros or even 5,000 euros, considering all the gear I would have gotten and all the things I would have needed in order to have a complete camera package. So, but then I had this current situation that I just wouldn't have a camera anymore if I didn't replace it. If I didn't replace it right now, I just wouldn't have a camera anymore. So I thought, why not just get a phone? So why not just take my camera budget of maybe 1,000 euros and just invest it into a phone? And therefore, making my phone the camera. So the development that had been happening was that phones had gotten so much better, also at recording video and also at shooting photography, and cameras just kind of got stuck. And I just took the budget I had. I would have gotten like a Canon 80D, would have cost me 500, 600 euros, and I would have gotten this budget and just invested it into, so I would have bought this camera anyway. I also would have replaced the lens, and I just took this money and just bought a better phone. So at this point in time, I still had a pretty crappy phone, but I just said, what if I take this budget and just basically combine camera budget and phone budget, and also camera and phone, and therefore just get a better phone. And this is the phone I'm still using to this day. And I shot more pictures probably on this phone than I would have shot in the same amount of time if I had bought a camera. And I mean, this phone still to this day just blows my mind. The simple fact that I can record this video right now and it just looks kind of nice, and the audio is kind of nice. So I am looking at myself all the time. Maybe if I just darken the screen, I just don't look at myself all the time. And I also have to charge my phone, which otherwise leads to you not seeing anything anymore. So this is kind of turning into a long video, but I'm just pouring out all the thoughts I have about my camera. This is kind of turning into a camera podcast, I guess. So, 7. I just took the budget and invested it into the phone, basically. But I still wanted to get a pro camera. So I still had the plan of buying the Canon M50 eventually, but the thing was I wanted to buy it refurbished because there was this huge camera hack, or just in general this tech hack. I discovered that if you get just used gear, and in Europe or even Germany you have a reseller called Rebuy, and this reseller effectively gives you 36 months worth of guarantee, of warranty. And a guarantee is not a thing, not the word I'm searching for. And so this means that, so in Europe or in Germany you have 2 years of warranty, and this means whenever things break in this time, you just can get it replaced if it was like, yeah, basically warranty. And so it's even better if you buy refurbished gear. But the thing is, there are different, so sometimes the refurbished stuff only has a few scratches and sometimes it has more scratches. And so depending on the amount of usage, you get it at different price points. So I wanted to wait till they had something in stock which was like the cheapest price and the most used, because I don't care, because after 2 weeks you have the scratches anyway. Okay, so I took my phone budget and my camera budget and just got a better phone and just used this phone, and I just basically stopped photography altogether because of course I did phone photography before, but I just didn't shoot from this point in time on. I just didn't shoot on a pro camera anymore, only to certain occasions, but I didn't have a camera anymore at this point in time. So, and also I just couldn't decide if I wanted to get the M50 or if I should invest into Sony. And I mean, there is so much connected to this, to these single decisions. Like, okay, you get the Canon M50, but then the microphone is really shitty and you just don't know about this. And you just, or, I mean, there are just so many things connected to this. For example, if I wanted to get into movie making in 2 years in time, it just doesn't make sense to switch all the time. So therefore, if you make a decision like this, at least in my mind, and at least in my perspective, you have to think about the next years. And so, and this decision also has to cover the next years in terms of usage. So, okay, why now the Canon M50? So I invested everything into my phone and I just used my phone from this point in time on, but I still had the Canon M50 in the back of my mind. Why? Because this was the camera that was mirrorless. It was by Canon. This meant I didn't have to switch operating systems, and it was something I was used to, mainly Canon, but it was also pretty cheap. It sold for 360 euros for a basically Canon 80D in a smaller body. So if you take a look at it, I mean, it's just so small compared to the other things. So it's just, I mean, it's as big as a phone basically. I mean, the Galaxy S10 has a bigger footprint, of course, not in terms of thickness, but in terms of just overall. I mean, you can just throw this into your backpack, and I mean, yeah, it's just so nice. And so I had these 2 lenses before, because there was also the problem I had before. I already told you that the these two old lenses I had, they just couldn't be used for recording video. Or you could record video, but then you had to get external audio. But even if you had a external microphone on the camera mounted on the camera itself, you still had the problem that whenever you recorded video, you had these focusing noises. And also, if you record video, and there is the thing with autofocus. Of course, if you have a phone, then autofocus is not a problem at all. But when it comes to video, autofocus is basically a thing of the last 2 to 5 years, and is only as good as in phones, and it has been, or has gotten only as good as in phones within the last 2 or 3 years. So basically starting in 2017, maybe with the Canon 70D. This was the main reason I got the 70D, or one of the main reasons, because it had this incredible dual autofocus. This meant you could just record yourself and your face or your eyes were actually in focus all the time. And if you move back, it was also in focus. I mean, these are things that are just completely normal, completely usual, completely automatic these days, because the phones are just so good. But they haven't been before, and they haven't been in DSLRs, in pro cameras, for ages. And so whenever you recorded video, and whenever I recorded video, there was this problem. I couldn't record video with automatic focus. So therefore, still with the 70D, if I recorded myself, basically everything was so, of course, not the camera moving, but the focus ring moving, and therefore making noises. So before this already, I replaced my two old lenses, because I broke the two old lenses, and then I replaced them with these lenses. So these are Stm lenses, and for one, they have, if you want to focus manually, you can just turn this ring and it just doesn't make any noise. And the other thing is, yeah, this is basically the main thing. So you can just record video with these, and you can just use the internal mic, or you can just use a microphone on top of the camera and just record yourself and just have everything in one place, and not record yourself on an external audio recorder and then manually putting everything together in the edit, because these are things that are just not worth your time if you think about it. Because in the same time, you could just record it again and record it better, because you got better, because you can now talk better and therefore explain it better. But if you have to fix things like this in the edit, then something simple like a YouTube video like this one just gets just becomes a 3, 4, 20, 100-hour project you probably will never finish, and you also will probably never do again. So therefore, I already had these two Stm lenses, and I have to say these are really, really good. And this was like 200 euros, and it was also used off of Rebuy or eBay, I don't know. And this was new for 80 euros. And this is the main advantage of having these cheaper lenses, because if I had gotten the equivalent in the Canon L series, which is the Pro series, and the Pro lens series Canon also offers, it would have been like 800. And so, as a matter of fact, just sticking with these semi-pro cameras in terms of price is just a completely other level. Okay, now, the thing was, if I would have gotten the M50 instead of the Sony, then I just could have used these two lenses I already had. And therefore, I just took the 70D, switched it with the smaller body, and therefore I would have a complete set again. And without me basically doing anything but getting rid of the old body, I sold it on eBay. I think I mean, it had this issue, the body, but I still sold it for, I think, 200 euros. And so I got the new one for 360. So basically I only paid 160 euros more for a completely new body. So this is basically the body of a Canon 80D, but also with 4K. And yeah, so after a while, I still had the two lenses because I didn't sell them, because I still wanted to buy eventually a pro camera to, in order to take pictures again. But I also wanted to switch to mirrorless, but I also wanted to, I discovered minimalism at this point in time, and I was like, I don't want to ever go around with a camera backpack again, but just use the backpack I already have and just be able to put my camera in there. So whenever I'm traveling, I would just take my camera and put it in there. Therefore, I still looked at the M50, and I finally bought it when it was in the state where it had a few scratches and it sold for 360. But then I had this other problem that I just couldn't mount the zoom lens on it, because I had bought the speed booster, because another thing is this. Yeah, there is this difference in sensor size. This basically means that if you take the light that comes into the lens and you project it onto a certain frame, that if the lens is meant to be APS-C, so for the smaller frame, for the smaller sensor size, and you have a bigger frame, then there is not enough light covering the bigger sensor size. This means you can only use these APS-C lenses with APS-C cameras, but you cannot use them with full frame cameras. The other way around, it's possible, because a bigger lens just projects still onto the bigger sensor size, but the smaller sensor size is just a cutout of the same image basically, and therefore it just cuts it out. This means the image is cropped by factor 1.6, but it's enough, and the other way around just doesn't work. This means if you have APS-C lenses and you get a full frame, then they don't work. But if you have a APS-C camera and you have full frame lenses, then they do work. This enables another thing. Mainly, if you have these APS-C lenses and you get, so this is a Canon Ef lens. Canon Ef is the full frame line of Canon, and EFS is the APS-C line of Canon. Because this is a full frame lens, this means that if you then get glass that basically just takes the image and puts it onto the smaller sensor, that you essentially have the effect of a full frame. It's kind of weird, but it means that the background is more blurred. So this means that the sensor, the smaller sensor size, the APS-C, just has more light. Therefore, the image just is better. And also, the zoom just is wider. This means that this now acts, in combination with the Canon M50, acts as if the Canon M50 was indeed a full frame camera, which is kind of weird, but what you get is a cinematic look. A look that is even more cinematic. So what makes up a cinematic look? It's the thing, it's multiple factors. Of course, the pro camera look in general. Then there is the blurred background you also see these days with phones. Also with video in phones. So when I bought the S10, I was completely surprised that you could also record video with the blurred background. I mean, that's just mind-blowing. But okay, let's get back to this lens. So basically, this adapter I just described is called a speed booster, and the adapter I have is a VILTROX or VILTROX, and it's a mount adapter Eos M50, and it's 0.71 times the zoom. And okay, this means I now have the 50 millimeters, usually because of the crop factor I just described, with 1.6 zooming in, because of the smaller sensor size, because of the APS-C sensor. If you mount a full frame lens onto an APS-C camera, gets reversed, and this acts as a full frame lens. So usually if you have an EFS lens, when it comes to Canon, it's EFS, and you mount it onto or any lens in general. So you just take the 50 millimeters and then you multiply it by 1.6. So usually this Canon Ef lens would act as if it was 80 millimeters. So effectively giving you more zoom, cutting out the image, as I just described. And also, this is the reason the EFS lenses, or just APS-C lenses in general, go so low with the numbers, because they essentially are a fisheye lens. So it's 18 millimeters to 135. The equivalent when it comes to the full frame lenses, the L series or the EF series in terms of Canon, would be 18 millimeters point 1.6 times the 1.6, essentially giving you the same zoom in. Okay, so this means that with the 50 millimeters I usually, also on the 70D, I had an 80 millimeter lens. And this is just perfect for portraits. So I shot a few portrait pictures with the 50 millimeters, so with the first 50 millimeters I had, but also with this one. But this just is not good for video because it just crops in too much. It just zooms in too much. It's just, yeah, too much. So essentially, what you have to get if you want to record yourself with video is you have to get a fisheye, or something that has something close to 18 millimeters or even 14 millimeters, because of the APS-C, and the APS-C then multiplying it with 1.6, and therefore ending it up with, for example, the 18 millimeters times 1.6 would be, I think, 24 millimeters. I didn't calculate that, it's just an estimation, and I don't want to show myself calculating it on video now. But as a matter of fact, I thought, if I wanted to get a pro camera, then this camera had to cover everything. It had to cover video, it had to cover shooting for something like YouTube, it also had to cover photography, it also had to cover portrait photography, it also had to cover maybe shooting in 4K, and also if I ever wanted to shoot like a short for YouTube, it should also cover that. At the same time, it should be as small as possible. I don't want to have more than 2 lenses. 2 lenses is the absolute maximum, because I had handled 2 lenses in the past. And the thing is, if you just are in a city, what I did for quite some time was, whenever I was in a city and I wanted to shoot something that had like good bokeh in the background, so blurred background look, because the thing is, with a zoom lens you don't get the blurred background as much, it just looks more like a pocket camera. And with these fixed apertures, or it's not really a fixed aperture, I just don't know the word for the zoom. Yeah, it doesn't matter right now because I cannot look it up because I'm recording this. Okay, well, the thing is, I just wanted one camera for the next, I don't know, 5 years, which I wouldn't have to switch. I wouldn't have to switch the manufacturer, so I would have to stay with Canon. But of course there is still the possibility to get an adapter and adapt Sony lenses to it. But I decided I would stick with Canon, but at the same time there was the huge risk that Canon wouldn't pick up the mirrorless game, and therefore just, yeah, not offering any alternatives at all in the future. Because let's face it, 1 or 2 years ago, before the Canon EOS R and the Canon EOS RP, and now there is the Canon EOS R5 came out, Canon basically didn't offer any good mirrorless cameras apart from the Canon M50. Okay, so I wanted to have one camera for everything. I wanted to have one camera that I just could take with me in my backpack. I wanted to have one camera that would enable me to, if I decided in the future to maybe shoot a feature film, maybe shoot a film for cinema, I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to have one camera, one single kit, one single very small portable kit I could just travel the world with, basically. I just could throw in my pocket whenever I wanted to shoot some photo or some video. And I wanted to have one camera that does it all, but at the same time I also wanted to have the flip out screen for recording myself. I also wanted to have still being able to shoot with Canon, or still staying within the Canon system. I also wanted to have these Stm lenses because I just didn't know about the other manufacturers. I also wanted to have the perfect Canon the perfect dual autofocus Canon offered at this point in time. And I just, for example, I researched the autofocus Sony offered, and I also took a look at an electric market, and then I just took a look at all these different cameras, and I also tried the Canon Eos, no, the Sony R3 and the R2 and the S2, and nowadays there's also the S3. But yeah, and I also tried the Canon EOS R, and I also tried the Canon EOS RP, but these were all just so expensive. And the thing is, I also wanted to have not only a camera I could shoot cinema with, because as a matter of fact, almost all of the cinema lenses you find these days still, also all the Sigma lenses, they just use the Canon mount. And also, if you wanted to get like completely in terms of budget into the cinema league, so there are of course the Arri Alexas, and then there are the Reds. So some YouTubers also shoot with the Red cameras. And it was, I mean, I am kind of a gearhead, you could say. And I was into, okay, what about this camera? What about this camera? What about this camera? For years, because I was like, okay, I could upgrade to the Sony, and I wanted to have this big plan of, yeah. I mean, it's just interesting to me because I have been shooting photos for years, and I also wanted to get into video. And so I just, every new camera came out was this possibility of, it could be the one. It could be the one that finally has it all. And every new Sony camera that came out could have had a flip screen, but Sony just didn't have a flip screen. And so I wanted to have one camera, but at the same time, I also wanted it to be as cheap as possible. And so I was in this situation where my Canon 70D just broke. I still had these two lenses. I already researched the Canon M50 quite a bit, and then kind of everything aligned. So with the speed booster and the 50mm, I could shoot a cinema look. I could, with the 50mm and the speed booster, I could use, so of course there are also the Canon M lenses, but this just wasn't not in my plan. So I would get the speed booster. The speed booster essentially was 100 bucks, 100 euros. Then I would have the cinema look. I also would have a zoom lens, and I would have the zoom lens, but with the speed booster. Therefore, I would have a zoom lens, usually not quite a good bokeh, but with the speed booster, it would have a good bokeh. There was only one mistake I made. The zoom lens, because it's an EFS lens, not an EF one, doesn't work with the speed booster. Because EFS lenses, an EF lens in combination with the speed booster works as if it was a full frame lens. It is essentially a full frame lens, and therefore it just takes the full frame and just concentrates it onto the APS-C sensor. But if you have already an EFS lens and you want to take the picture and make it smaller, so the sensor, the projected image of reality, and then make it smaller, then the problem is that it's too small because it just uses the same crop factor, and then it's too small for the APS-C sensor. This is the reason a speed booster from EFS lens, so basically from APS-C lens to APS-C camera, doesn't work, because it cannot get any smaller anymore, because it's already meant to be small. So the only option would have been to sell this lens. So I thought this would be the ultimate solution. It still could have been the ultimate solution, but there is another problem. The main problem is I only wanted to have 2 lenses, because anything above 2 lenses just prevents you basically from shooting at all. And I tried it in the past. I was in different cities and I just switched lenses all the time. And then you get things into the sensor. You also, the risk of you dropping the lens is, or the camera, or I mean, you also have to have the camera bag out all the time, because what you essentially have to do is you have to have access to all your camera gear. And it's not just your camera dangling around in front of you, but it's also, you also have to have access to the zoom lens and or the portrait lens, and then switch them. So what I wanted, or back to the cinema rig, I wanted to have also the possibility for my camera to be a full-blown cinema camera. Basically, if you think about it, the camera itself, the camera body itself, isn't even that important. The main thing is the lens, also in terms of look. And the hack is kind of that I had an APS-C camera, therefore, in terms of budget, really good. But with the speed booster, I could just use any EF or L series lens, or also all the big cinema lenses that are out there. They just, almost all of them amount to Canon EF, which essentially creates this ultimate rig of a cheap portable camera you can use with these cheap lenses. You can even use with even smaller lenses like these, because the lens, this is the 50mm, it isn't even that big, because I have the Canon, I have another adapter on there. So here we have the speed booster, but on the zoom lens isn't even that big, because there is the adapter on there, because of the mistake in thinking I made. Because I already told you, the mistake is that I wanted to take an Ef lens and use it with the speed booster, which doesn't work. So there is essentially, I bought another adapter, which was 30 euros, 40 euros, and now I can use the zoom lens. I thought about replacing it with an Ef lens, which would have been a solution that would have worked, and therefore I could have gotten the speed booster. But as a matter of fact, I also wanted to be able to just record myself like this, with the flip out screen, and also maybe mounting it on my desk and then just record myself. But the problem is, if you use this, okay, the speed booster also, of course, does something to the zoom. Mainly it zooms out. But if I couldn't use the speed booster, I just wouldn't have this optionality. The thing is also, the Canon EF range of lenses just didn't offer an 18 to 135. But in the past I used 18 to 200, and this basically is the golden grail when it comes to a lens that covers everything. And with the option of, if you wanted to have a better bokeh or a better image quality, you could just switch to the portrait lens, but of course having a fixed zoom again. So basically the standard go-to lens would have been the zoom, maybe with a bokeh, but that doesn't work, as we just found out. And yeah, then, but also having these 2 lenses, being able to record video, because both are quiet. So this was another thing why I just didn't get the EF lens, because I didn't really know. So the thing you want to look out for, at least when it comes to Canon lenses, is STM. And also the L series just has motors in it, focusing motors, that are completely dead silent, and you can record video with it. So, and now just everything aligned, as I just said. And I now have basically a camera. So if you think about, maybe it's just an idea, but I mean, right now, of course, it's just an idea. But what if you had a camera that could also shoot basically everything in terms of image quality, in terms of video, you could ever want? And I mean, I mentioned it already, all these different constraints I had when it comes to a camera. But another thing is, because all these things are so cheap. If it gets stolen, or if it gets damaged, or if I drop it, I can't just replace it. I can just buy it again for 700 euros. This complete set is only 700 euros. Maybe it's even 600. I didn't calculate it accurately. It's just in my head right now. I just averaged it. Not even averaged it, but I don't know the word right now. So, let's talk about the Canon Eos M50 for short. It has it's also a full-blown photo camera, not only a full-blown video camera, but also a full-blown photo camera. This means that you can put in a flash here. This means that you still have the option to just look through. And the main thing that prevented me from the Canon M50 was that I was at an electric market, or a market where you could get cameras, and I looked through it, and it just was because I was used to the mirrors before, looking through it like this through a screen was just, okay, this is crap. And this was the reason I didn't take another look at the M50 like for months. And I was like, okay, I need to get the Sony, I don't know. There's also an APS-C line with Sony, but the main problem is they don't have the flip-out screen. But I wanted the flip-out screen, and I have used it for years, and I wanted to being able to shoot myself. So, to shoot myself on video, of course. So now, I do have the Canon M50. It is a full-blown Canon camera. It has the same system I have used for years. It has so many things. I mean, you can look up the specs if you want to. It has only one SD card slot, which is a little bit of a bummer, and it also doesn't have a microphone in. This is another thing that prevented me from buying this camera, but yeah, it's really cheap. It's really, really small. So for the first time, I can't just throw it into my backpack. If I ever wanted to decide to upgrade my camera, I can. So basically the things I can do right now is I can either upgrade the body or the lenses, but I can't just rent lenses right now. Or you can just rent lenses if you decided to also get into this kit. I have the perfect portable YouTube camera. It's the smallest YouTube camera, it's the cheapest YouTube camera, it's the best budget YouTube camera on the market right now, basically. And also the option to get it refurbished. Also the option to have it replaced at any time if it gets stolen. So there is no need for camera insurance because it's basically very cheap, at least when it comes to camera prices. It's very cheap. Then I have these two dead silent lenses for recording video. Canon still offers the biggest range of lenses, and all these third-party manufacturers, or second-party in this when it comes to lenses, they also mainly are making Canon lenses, or lenses with Canon mount. Lenses for Canon cameras, because Canon was the main camera manufacturer in the past, apart from Nikon. Sony only got into it in like the last 15-20 years. And so I can now shoot 4K. I can now basically use this and build it out with a full-blown cinema rig if I ever decide to. Rent Canon L series lenses, even rent I don't know, the lenses you use in cinema. Sometimes Sigma, you basically have like fixed primes, and they are just bigger because they capture more light. Basically, you can do everything you want when it comes to photo or video with this camera. And I mean, that's just, to me, it's still mind-blowing. The thing, it hasn't been working because of the zoom lens, and I just didn't know what to do. And I finally bought the adapter. And so I now have a full camera kit that does everything I ever want. It's minimalistic, it's cheap, it's... I told you all the things you should know already. But yeah, it still fascinates me. And yeah, this is it. I now have the camera of my dreams, basically. And also, yeah, I should stop right now. So, I hope you enjoyed this. The longer I talk and the more I have to concentrate on the topics, the deeper or the thicker my German accent gets again. And if I do have to concentrate on my voice again, it gets a little bit more like a good voice, you could say. And also my faked English accent gets more prominent again. So basically I can fake an American accent and also can fake a British accent. But the thing is, I basically can choose because I don't have I could also use the German accent, so now not getting weird. The thing is, whenever I concentrate, I can concentrate on my language more. So, is this the perfect camera kit for everything? I think so, and I hope you enjoyed this. I don't know how long it was. I mean, I started when it was still when there was still light outside. I started basically outside. I only wanted to shoot a few TikToks, but with TikToks, the thing is, you can't just say like 3 sentences and then the TikTok is over, even if you record 60 seconds of TikTok. And then you just choose a random topic. And yeah, I just wanted to have it all in one place. I still recorded it like in vertical mode because I think people will watch on phones in the next few years anyway. And so right now, of course, if the Canon M50 gets if the Canon M60 comes out, the Canon M50 gets even cheaper. There are a few minor setbacks with the Canon M50. There is no headphone. There is no headphone out. So the Canon 80D or the 90D, for example, has a headphone out, which is an advantage because if you record video, you want to be able to monitor it, and because otherwise you don't know how to. For example, if you record 2 hours worth of footage and you're talking to the camera all the time and then you don't know if the audio was leveled out, then it's just unfortunate, you could say, and you don't have any way to capture it after the fact. Then, yeah, you do have a microphone in. I said it wrong. It's only the microphone. It's only the headphone out. I missed. It does have NFC. You can connect it to your phone. It does have the hot shoe mount. It does have this wheel, which is very nice. It also has a dedicated button here. I didn't even go into detail what the Canon M50 has. It's just more the bigger picture I wanted to give you. It has the flip out screen, which is just essential, I think. And it does have HDMI out, and also you can also use it as a webcam these days because Canon has a software that actually allows you to use it as such. Then the batteries are quite small. It has one SD card slot, and that's about it, I think. And now I have the perfect camera for my needs, and I think I would just end it right now. About the concept of this video. I could have made a YouTube video for 10 minutes and just maybe put everything in there, but as a matter of fact, it's not that I didn't want to, but when it comes to what I think is this, if there is someone out there who will watch this in the future, then I will have helped this someone so much more than with a 10-minute video. Of course, it's not either TikTok or long videos like this, but I think it would have made sense to talk about this in a podcast, but why not just a podcast with video and then put it on YouTube? I mean, the audience for podcasts is so much smaller, but also because you have to watch it, but also you can just use this and use it as a podcast. And I still recorded the video. This is the reason I recorded the video, because if you record on the audio, then you don't have the video. So this is the reason I made it. I only wanted to talk like 10 or 20 minutes, but it got a little bit long because this is basically my camera research from the last years, and also my thoughts about it, and also my usage, and just all these different things accumulating in the Canon M50 with these with these Canon lenses, and also with these two adapters I already mentioned. And so now, that's a wrap. I told you everything you can possibly want to know, and if there is still something else, you can just Google it. But the reason you probably watched my video was because you probably were interested in the things I had to say. And so, yeah, that's basically just justifying why I made this video. So, therefore, I ended. This is me signing out right now with the Canon M50. And also, can we just appreciate the fact that it looks so nice?